Hello friends, Russell here, coming to you today from the shop over here at Access Automotive. Just kind of wanted to update some more on the Jeep and get into some of the specifics. This episode we're going to talk mostly about the engine, what we did with it, what the plans are for it, where it came from, and this video is going to have a lot of photographs, a lot of voiceover dub in it talking about specifically what we did. But as an additional a beginning primer, essentially what we did is the original engine in the CJ-7, when we bought it and drove it here to the shop, it was only running on 2 cylinders, and once I did a compression test, we had 0 compression in 4 of the 6 cylinders. So that's when we decided that it was going to come out and get a full rebuild. And then after doing some research, maybe let's build a stroker, let's do an LS conversion, or put an AMC 304. Lots of different motor options for these CJs. I decided that I wanted to just stick a stock 91 and later 4.0 Jeep engine in it and run the factory fuel injection. This is going to be a daily driver. I want the turnkey easiness of a fuel injected car, reliability of emissions, mileage, etc. Not looking for gobs of power. It's still going to be a very capable trail vehicle, but really what I wanted was a reliable, long distance motor. So we sourced out a used 4.0 out of a 96 model Cherokee, and high mileage motor. I was able to listen to it run before the motor was pulled, and I bought it. The engine was previously installed in a Cherokee that was owned by the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. It was a very well maintained engine, little greasy, grimy, and dirty, but it was in pretty good shape. And so we proceeded to kind of go through it, pulled the cylinder head off, and had it sent over to the head shop and had it gone through. And the head shop called me back and said that that it had already been gone through, and they just had to recut the valve seats, but everything was perfect in the head. So at that time we opened up the motor and started doing inspections on the cylinder walls, bore, out around, bearing inspections, and essentially just put it all back together with new seals, etc. But I'm going to pick the camera up here and kind of walk around the motor and show you some things, and then we'll do a picture slideshow, and I'll voice over that, and kind of the assembly of the motor, if you will. So here we go. All right, so factory 4.0 liter inline 6 AMC Jeep Chrysler engine. And so some of the things we did, obviously we've got the factory intake manifold, fuel injector rail, injectors, etc. Now this here is part of that HESCO wiring harness, and we'll talk a little bit about the harness that's used to adapt this into a CJ. But essentially we completely went through the motor, all gaskets, all seals, new thermostat housing. This is actually a HESCO thermostat housing adapter, if you will. It flows higher than the factory one. We used a flow cooler water pump, and I'll put links at all this in the description. You can see down here is our part of that HESCO kit is a different crank damper that has the pickup teeth and the mag pickup for the fuel injection. Like I said, all of this stuff was a little bit custom because we're sticking a Cherokee motor into a CJ, so we had to get parts from a 97 Jeep Wrangler, the AC and alternator brackets from a 97 Wrangler, and that allows us to run a single mechanical fan. Come around to this side here, we're running factory. The coil, I believe, is off of a 2000 to 2002 Wrangler. They chose that for the kit because it has a better electrical connector on it. Stock distributor, using I don't even know what brand this is, but the cap and rotor have brass contacts on it. We use MagnaCore spark plug wires. Of course, we kept the standard Cherokee oil filter adapter to get the filter out of the way. There's not a whole lot of room here with the motor mounts and such to have a filter hanging off the end. that allows us to use actually a bigger, better oil filter. I always, on the Jeeps, I always use a Wix brand filter, and you can see the part number, it's upside down, but that's the one we order and use. Everything that we put on the motor external is brand new. I've got brand new fuel injectors, new idle air control valve, throttle position valve, the map sensor, which is in a box over there, will end up mounting up just up on the firewall. New starter motor, new alternator, new everything. So, but one of the things I wanted to say, like I said, the motor came out of a vehicle that was owned by Department of Natural Resources. Now, if you're in a state that doesn't have a DNR, think game wardens. And in this state, they're really good about maintaining their vehicles. And I don't know if you can see it. You should be able to. You see that white C at that cylinder? There's not enough light here to see it, but at every cylinder mark, it's marked with a white C. And that was my first clue that the motor had been rebuilt. Now, when we had the cylinder head off and I checked dimensions on the bore, it was within spec with absolutely no ridge or top on it, which tells me that the motor had been rehoned and rebuilt. Which led us to just doing gaskets and seals and putting it all back together. So I've got good hopes and plans that this motor's going to run real well. But let's go over kind of this HESCO kit. It includes the full wire harness to all the sensors. Obviously down to the crank position sensor, water temp sensor, all 6 injectors, comes to the IAC, airflow meter. We'll have, and then there's where's it at? Plug here is for the map sensor, the vacuum line for the map sensors, comes with all that. And of course the harness comes around, supposed to come around the motor like this. A couple of ground ports on it. I believe that is for the transmission. We haven't finished routing it all the way back. Now, we're gonna mount this kit. The motor's out of a 96, but this kit is actually designed to use the 95 fuel injection. So we've got, actually I think this came from a 93 Wrangler 6-cylinder fuel injection computer, and we're gonna mount it. We're gonna mount it on the fender wall here, right where the factory jack would have been. Now, if anybody that's owned a Jeep ever knows, the factory jack on these is about worthless once you get above a 30-inch tire. They do no good anyway, so you have to get a high lift jack if you want a jack. So that's kind of it. And then we're going to do a picture slideshow and the voiceover talking about how we rebuilt the motor.
And like I said before, the engine was really, really dirty. We toyed with the idea of doing a 4.7 liter stroker. That's why we kept the crank. Once we opened it all up, I noticed that the rock arms were really, really clean, which was my first clue that the motor had been rebuilt at some point in time. And then once I got the head off and noticed there was no ridge and I could still see some crosshatch in the bores, and that's when we really decided that we were just going to kind of do a quick freshing on it, install some new components, camshafts, timing set, oil pan, etc. I did decide that at some point we may still build a stroker out of this block, so we decided to use a roller rocker set on it. And of course, once we got the head back from Dover cylinder head, put it on, started installing the roller rockers. I had a Gibson header laying around. I think there's some photos in here of that header installed on the engine. Once I got it on, then I decided that, I really want a Doug Thorley set. So what we actually have on the motor right now is a Doug Thorley header. Of course, once we got it installed and everything's ready and good to go. So once again, if you like this content, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit that bell icon so you can see future content coming up, and there's more to